Hi everyone, I am back. I wanted to do a video discussing what it was like as a NICU mom and my experience visiting my son every day while he was in the hospital. So, as you all know, he was born early at 28 weeks and 5 days on March 3rd. And for me, my experience at the NICU was a very good experience. I don't have any complaints. There are a few things that I feel I wish were done a little differently, or even for myself that I wish I would have done a little differently, which I will talk about later. But overall, my experience with the nurses and the doctors, all of the staff at the NICU were just positive. It was amazing, honestly. I had a really great experience. So when my son was born, I didn't get to hold him right away. He was taken away to his room in the NICU, and the way that their NICU at the hospital that he stayed at was set up was just an open room. And there's when you walk in, there's a front desk for the nurses where they sit. So you walk in and then you see this open room, and there's about one, two, three, four, five sections that are kind of split off with like curtains that you can pull around, where you could see like different beds set up for the preemies. So each preemie was in their own isolette and separated by a curtain. And those curtains were usually open. They weren't closed unless the parents were there. So if the nurses were going in and out, they kept the curtains open. But if you came in, you could close your curtain and have privacy. We didn't have separate rooms or anything like that, which was fine. I felt like there still was a good amount of privacy, regardless of the fact that it was all one huge room, and you had about four other preemies besides my own in that room. So I didn't get to see my son right away after I gave birth. It was about 3 or 4 hours after. 2 hours I had to stay in my room and recover after giving birth. And the nurses would come in and check on me and press on my stomach and just make sure that my uterus was contracting. And then once that 2 hours ended, a nurse came in, let me know that everything was good. I could take a shower, and then get ready to see my son. So I took, I think it was like a couple hours to take a shower, get dressed, and then go through like paperwork with one of the doctors, and then also go over kind of like the procedure at the NICU before you go into the room to see your baby. They go through like, the expectations, what you have to do, washing your hands, all of that. So we went through all of that procedure. And then I was able to go into the room and see my son. And I remember that day, it was just very emotional for me because everything was unexpected. He was so tiny. He was 2 pounds, just a little tiny little thing. And I think 2 pounds, 11 ounces, I believe. I don't even remember how many ounces, but he was little. And I just remember just looking at him in the isolette and feeling a lot of emotions because, you want to take your baby home once you give birth. And here he is. And it just felt kind of like, they call it an isolette, and honestly it does feel a little bit isolating because you're not able to touch your baby. You have to ask permission if it's okay, and one of the nurses discussed with us the proper ways of touching your preemie born so early. They don't want you to stroke them, but just very firm touches, like letting them hold your finger, things like that. So my biggest thing when I got into the room was I really wanted to do skin to skin. I just knew that skin to skin had so many benefits, and I will say that I do believe that is why my baby did so well. Not only because of prayer and God, my faith in God and other people praying for him, which I believe was the biggest factor was God definitely being there for us. But also, I did do skin to skin, and skin to skin has a lot of benefits, which I will probably discuss in a different video. But if you're not familiar with all the benefits, it's definitely something to look at and research, especially if you have a baby that is born prematurely and admitted into the NICU. So that was my thing, is I really wanted to do skin to skin as soon as possible with him. And they unfortunately told me I couldn't do it that day. I had to wait because they were going to put him under the billy ribbon lights because of his jaundice. So I think they did it like an hour later. They set it up, and my husband and I had left and come back a little bit later. Oh, sorry. My little baby's, he's coughing a little bit, but he's okay. You're okay, right, honey bunny? So, yeah, so they had it set up and everything. So they were going to put him, they were planning to put him under the bilirubin lights because of his jaundice. And they told me that they would let me know like when I could hold him, but most likely the next day. They just wanted to monitor him, and he can only be out of the lights for no more than, I think it was an hour. So the first day was very exhausting. My husband and I did have 2 more nights where I was able to stay at the hospital before I was discharged. So we stayed there for 2 more nights, and then my husband went to work that third day. And so for, I think, the rest of that week or the next week, I came to the NICU and spent pretty much the entire day there. So the first few days was a lot. I was there all day long. And I do feel that you do want to kind of spend a lot of time there at first. I know a lot of people say don't get too, what's the word? Like, give yourself breaks and do other things, still have a normal life. But I feel like the first few days that I spent gave me the chance to meet all of the doctors, meet a lot of the doctors, not all of them, but meet a lot of the doctors and nurses and just kind of see how things are ran there, and just to get familiar with my son's environment. Like, he was going to be there for a while, and for me, being there from morning to evening was good to see like how they transition the nurses. I was there for the doctor's rounds in the morning, and I got to help with little things that they would allow me to do with my son. So as time went on and he got a little bigger, things like changing his diaper, all of his cares eventually became my responsibility, and which I feel like was probably the best experience. One of the best experiences is when your baby is yours to take care of. Basically, the nurses aren't doing everything for them anymore. When you're there, they kind of just let you do your own thing, and that depends on the health of the preemie, of course. But my experience was really good because Alexander didn't really have a lot of issues. They told me right away, my husband and I, they told us that he was doing great. He was breathing room air when he was born. They had him hooked up to the CPAP machine just to help him, just as like an aid. So he wasn't 100% reliant upon it. So they were telling me constantly every day when I would come in, they're like, your son is a rock star. He's doing amazing. Like, he's just progressing so well. He didn't have any health issues. So it was literally like I was just watching him grow. And I think only for me, the only thing that was a little bit stressful is just seeing him in the isolette hooked up to the monitors, not being able to hold him whenever I wanted to, having to ask permission to hold him, only getting like an hour a day until he had gotten a little bit bigger. So that was difficult for me. It was emotional because you just want to hold your baby and he should be home with you. So for me, going home at night was difficult. I remember the first night when I went home, and that's when I had gone home early that night. And I got really emotional. I think I sat in the bathtub and I cried because I had just had a baby and he wasn't with me. And my my pregnant belly had shrunken. That was no longer there. And I just remember even when I was pregnant, bath time for me was a fun time to just talk to my baby while he was in my womb. And I would sing to him while I was in the bath. And he wasn't there. And I remember crying, and it was a very emotional time for me. My husband was comforting. He came in and just, tried to make me feel better. But again, my experience was a good one. So the nurses were just very helpful. They answered a lot of questions that I had. They encouraged me to do a lot of things for my baby, Alexander, which we also call him AJ. So eventually, as time went on, I was the one that was changing his diapers, and I would spend a full probably 6 to 8 hour day there in the NICU. My husband worked 10 minutes away, so we would get up early, drop him off at work at around like 5:50, a little bit close to 6 o'clock, 6 a.m. And then I would drive over to the NICU, get there a little bit after 6, and start my day with AJ. I'd say hi to all the nurses. They would update me on how he did the night before. And then once I was able to just do skin to skin with him whenever I wanted, I would request to do it right away. So I'd come in and we would change his diaper, do the little things that needed to be done, check his temperature. And I actually would have the times where I would pump breast milk for him, because he was primarily drinking my breast milk with a little bit of fortified Enfamil. They add it to help increase his calories, and then other vitamins and things they would add to my breast milk. But I would time when I would pump with when his feeds were. He was feeding through the feeding tube, so I would time when I would pump with the time for his feedings. So if it was every hour or every 2 hours, I was according to that. So 6:30, 9:30, 12:30 is when I was pumping. And so I would hold him in between those times. So I would come in around 6, a little after 6, do his cares with the nurses, and then do skin to skin with him until about 9:15, do his cares again. And for a while, I was just doing skin to skin after we do his cares every like 3 hours. So I'd get a good at least 6 hours of skin to skin with him. But then eventually, I want to say maybe 3 weeks in, I felt that it was necessary, maybe 2 weeks. 2 weeks in, I felt it was necessary for me to have a normal routine as opposed to just sitting in that room with him all day. I would come in early, do skin to skin with him for 3 hours, and then I would leave. I would go to the gym, and then I would get lunch, come back, and do skin to skin with him again around 12:30. So I come a little bit early, like 12:15, go back to the NICU, and then do his cares, and then do skin to skin. So for me, it was good to have a routine so that I wasn't too burnt out with the same thing every day of just being there in that environment. Even though, yes, I was spending time with him, I was still allowing myself to have time for myself to, just to be rejuvenated and not feel so tired. I would even take naps. I couldn't drive home. We were about 25 minutes from home, so going back and forth was a lot with gas. But we made do. So I would spend pretty much the whole 8-hour day. Pick up my husband, who would get off work at 4:30. And in the beginning, my husband would go home, he would shower, eat, then we would go back to the NICU for the evening so that he could spend time with him. But eventually my husband was only able to just go on the weekends. It was easier for him and just easier on us as opposed to driving back and forth with gas and everything. But it was a good experience. So being there early in the morning allowed for me to sit and listen to the nurses and doctors when they did rounds, and they would discuss AJ's progress, how he was doing. I could ask questions. And there were always people coming in and talking to me about different things. There was a nurse that would come in and talk about proper ways of holding AJ, how to do, appropriate touch as he got older. She would update me on different methods and ways of touching him. And so it felt like a very, very, very long period of time. And I did get burnt out, I think, closer to when I felt like he should be coming home. I remember the day when they took him out of his isolette and they switched him to being able to have an open crib. When he switched to open crib, that was probably like the best moment ever, because it meant that I could go in and freely pick him up as I chose to do so and not have to ask the nurses or get their help. And if they were busy with other preemies in the room, I just didn't have to bother them. I would just go in, and he was hooked up to the monitors, but I felt comfortable enough grabbing the cables and grabbing the big tube that's set up for him, for his cannula, for the oxygen that he was on. And I would just pick him up and undress him and then do skin to skin with him, do his diaper change, put him back in his isolate or his crib, do his diaper change. So that was, when that happened, it just felt like I was his sole caretaker. And the nurses wouldn't even bother to help anymore. They would just ask, did you check his temperature? And they would just document everything. So I just remember that being a great moment. And my son, his progress was amazing. At 10 days old, he was suckling at my breast, which is rare for preemies to start doing so early. And then it wasn't like a week later, he was breastfeeding very early. Everything was happening very quickly. They kept telling me he acts like he's a month older than he is. Your baby is amazing. Like, he is a rock star. They were even saying he is the poster child for the NICU. And my experience definitely was different than most moms because my son did not have any medical problems or issues, and he was doing so well. And I do, like I said, attribute that to God, praying and believing and have faith that God was going to be with him and keep him strong and healthy, but also doing the skin to skin. Doing at least 6 hours of skin to skin every day for the 48 days that he was in the NICU. That was extremely beneficial. But I'm trying to think of other things. Like I said, my day today was pretty much the same. I'd come in, do skin to skin, leave, go to the gym, and then I would come back, have lunch, sit in their family rooms. They had family rooms there, which was really nice. And they also offered pumps that you could use, the hospital grade pumps, Medela hospital grade pumps. So I could pump while I was there and not have to really like bring anything with me. They had everything that I needed, which was great. And the family rooms were just nice little rooms. They weren't cozy. They're just kind of remind me of a doctor's office with these like couches that you would see in a waiting room of a doctor's office. So I would nap on the couches. I'd bring my own pillow and blanket and just take like an hour nap before I'd go back and hold AJ. But yeah, that was pretty much my experience. I will say that if you are in the NICU and you have questions, you don't understand things, it's definitely good to ask questions and to push a little bit when it comes to the progress of your child. For AJ, he was doing so well. At one point, I felt that he really should be moved ahead a little bit as far as the oxygen that they had him on. So once he was on the high flow nasal cannula, he was on that for quite a minute, and I asked if it was possible to lower the oxygen level because they had him at a 4, and it was like he never kept the thing in his nose. And I spent a lot of time there. I was there for 8 hours, and that cannula that was in his nose was always out. He was always pulling it out. Even when I went home, and this is another great thing about the children's hospital where my son was, they have this camera that you can watch your babies on an app when you go home, or anytime they have the camera set up, and you can watch them. Unless they're doing his cares, it would pop up a little picture that would tell you that the baby was, the nurses were doing his cares, and so the camera was just temporarily off. But that was a great thing too. That made me feel good going home at night and not being there with him. I could see him on the camera and see that he was doing well. But yeah, so for me, it was a short time for him in the NICU, and it did feel like a very long time for me, and time just seemed to go slowly the closer it was for him time for him to go home. But like I was saying, you have to really advocate for your baby sometimes and just push. So I did push for them to lower him on the oxygen, and they did. One of the doctors lowered it, and then that same day they lowered it again that night when I wasn't there, and I came back the next morning. They were like, oh yeah, we moved him from a 2% to a 1.25%. And I'm like, what? And they're like, he's doing great. We might even lower him again that day. So that was exciting. I spoke up because he had been on that 4% for a while, and he wasn't even keeping his cannula in his nose. And so that happened, and then eventually I asked if they could put him on room air, though the doctor did not agree with that. She said it was too soon. Honestly, didn't think it was too soon because, again, like I said, he never had the cannula in, and at that time the nurses weren't even putting it back in his nose. And my son had a little bit of irritation from the constant, like him messing with it. turning his head, and then the nurses having to put it back in every time he took it out. So I was kind of concerned with that, and I really just wanted them to just take him off of it, see how he did. But they don't want the babies to fall back. And honestly, to me, my question is, like, my baby had no health issues. What would he fall back to? He's completely healthy. How would he backtrack, you know? So then they eventually put him on the low flow cannula, and I advocated for them to lower that as well. So they lowered that, the low flow cannula, and eventually they took him off, and it was pretty quick. Like within a week, he went from being on 4% high flow to the low flow cannula and off, and he was already breastfeeding. He was taking bottles. He was doing everything pretty quickly. Everything was so fast, and he progressed wonderfully. And I remember when they told me that, one of the doctors said that, you know, we could get prepared for him to go home in a couple of days on a Thursday, which was 4/20, the date that he came home. And then another doctor the next day decided to keep him because he hadn't gained weight in 3 days. And that was an emotional moment for me. I did cry when I had a meeting with all the nurses and doctors and the staff there. They always have like this, I want to call it an exit meeting before your baby is discharged. They will meet with you and let you ask questions. And that was a little heartbreaking for me because it was on a Wednesday that she told me that she wanted to keep him longer, and she didn't give me a date. And it sounded from how she was speaking about his progress and wanting to keep him, that she wanted to keep him longer than a couple days, like even like a week. She even used the word weeks in her conversation, and I was crying. And I said, I understand, I get it. She's like, she's told me she just wanted to see him gain weight, and he did. He gained. They hadn't weighed him yet when we had the meeting, so that later that afternoon they weighed him. He had gained weight. The next day he gained weight, and then she told me he can go home. She's like, he can go home today. And bringing him home was, oh my gosh, like there was so much anxiety that I felt before while I was sitting in the NICU waiting for 5 o'clock, because she said at 5 o'clock, as long as they weigh him before that and he's gained more weight by 5 o'clock, then you can take him home. Or I think it was 3 o'clock, and then she wanted to keep him a couple extra hours. And I just remember just that feeling of like, nothing, please don't let anything go wrong. Don't let him have any like episodes, which he was not having any episodes. And he did well, and they let him go home. So again, my experience was a positive one, other than I did feel stressed, and I did feel a lot going through postpartum while I was in the NICU and not being able to have him in my arms at home. But for any of you moms out there that do have babies in the NICU, you have to look at every day as another day closer to your baby being home with you. And that's how I looked at every day that I was there. I just said, today is another day closer to him coming home. And I kept that mindset. I kept a positive mindset, and just made sure to stay calm and not allow myself to get stressed out. There were moments where I did cry, definitely at night, going home, watching him on the camera while I'm pumping milk to take to the NICU for him. It was a lot. Sometimes I could see him on camera and he looked a little uncomfortable since he was dealing with reflux. And it's hard because it's like, I want to be there to hold him. Or when he was at the point where he was nursing and I could see him rooting and wanting to nurse, and I'm like, oh, I want to be there. I want to nurse my baby. And the nurses would just give him a bottle, of course. But it's like, you want to be there for your baby in the way that a mother should be for her child 24/7. But anyway, that is it. I need to kind of tend to my little boy now. He's waking up. I will be back again, hopefully with another video discussing what it was like taking him home and how everything has been as a mom raising a preemie. So if you have any questions, let me know. If there's anything that you'd like me to talk about in another video, just leave a comment below. Have a good day. Bye.